Hello, how are you,
Hey,
Natalie?
Eve, good to see you. Hi,
You too.
everybody.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're watching live, or obviously you can watch this in the recording. This is a very timeless book, so you could watch this 10 years from now and still be learning from Natalie. But welcome everybody who's here with us today. We're talking about Natalie's newest book, Move, Think, Rest. You can see the beautiful cover on right at the top of us in the right above our boxes. And I want to just launch into this by saying congratulations and tell us a little bit about your history to this moment. Obviously, you're a big creativity expert and you've had other writings, and I love your book and two iterations um, of really thinking about creativity. And now you've moved into a new framework of move, think, rest. So, can we talk a little bit about your past first?
Sure. So first of all, thank you to Porchlight Books for sharing your platform on this really exciting week of the launch of the Think Rest, and thank you so much, Eve, for joining in conversation. We are friends and sisters from another mister, and I your work resonates with me, and it's a real treat that you are taking time out to just be in conversation about this work. I would say that the first thing I want people to understand about Move, Think, Rest is that as a creativity strategist, the whole focus and purpose of my work is to help people to understand that creativity is not a nice to have, it is a must have. It is the engine for innovation. And it's a strategic competency that we can build. It's something that we can build as a capacity, as individuals, as teams, and as organizations. So, all of my work at Figure Eight Thinking, where I help leaders and teams to connect the dots between creativity and business results, all of my IP and work really ladders up. These are on ramps to help you to build creativity as a strategic competency. So, Move, Think, Rest is one more tool, it's one more framework to help you identify ways to toggle, as I like to say, between wonder and rigor to solve problems. My personal relationship with Move, Think, Rest, unbeknownst to me at the time, is really rooted in my own personal burnout moment, which happened when I was a professor. I was a professor for 16 years. It was my dream job. I loved it until I didn't anymore, and I didn't even realize I was getting to that point until it was probably a Wednesday at 5:15 p.m. I'm walking back from the photocopier machine to my office with my arms full of like 11 more papers to grade, three more recruiting calls to make. That was part of my work as this director of this MBA program, and needed to text my husband John one more time to let him know I'd once again be late for dinner. And I heard someone say out loud in a really terse tone, I don't want to do this anymore. And that voice was me. And my jaw was in fact clenched. And I was so shocked that I didn't realize I had been thinking that, but it could not be contained anymore. And I get to my office, I shut the door, I sit down, I go, oh, shit, I'm gonna have to reckon with this moment. So one of it is my own personal data points of realizing something had to shift. There was a lack of alignment between the ways that I was working and really making sure that I was putting out my best work. Fast forward to I've now, you know, retired from academia after 16 years, building this business of as a creativity strategist, figure eight thinking, and doing a lot of innovation work in companies where I was having a lot of sidebar conversations with leaders and with team members where they were confessing to me that they were kind of dying a slow death at work, and they really needed to figure out ways to make this creative capacity building work stick. And so that personal burnout moment, coupled with these sidebar conversations, and then combined with as a solopreneur, needing to build in guardrails and buffers for my own mental fortitude, I was observing in the ways that I worked as an entrepreneur that times when I thought I was procrastinating, when I stepped away from the desk to unload the dishwasher, go for a short walk, take a daydream break, which I'm fond of doing, when I would return to the work at hand, my ideas were just crisper, clearer, something that had been stymieing, stewing in me that I wasn't getting to a clear answer to. Things were just clicking into place. And for those three reasons, I began to consider, what if the ways that we've been thinking about productivity really need to shift? We need to reframe the ways we've been thinking about productivity.
So you talk a lot about that in your opening chapter. So what do you want to replace productivity with?
Yeah, I actually think that the ways we think about productivity is a relic of the first industrial revolution, and we should be replacing it with a model of cultivation.
Mhm.
And I got to this metaphor of cultivation because I figured, if I'm going to slam and critique productivity, well, what else I got? Like, what's the alternative? So I began to wonder, before the first industrial revolution, what were the majority of societies around the world doing? How were they creating a living? And the majority of societies were agricultural based economies. They were agrarian based economies, where the MO is cultivation. And that got me to really do an unpacking of what is involved in cultivation. And what I landed on was a really interesting friction between the ways we go about a productivity model versus a cultivation model. And here's how I think about it. Productivity is very much an either or proposition. And when we are productive, we focus on speed, efficiencies, output, and we measure what we can see. And as kind of a casualty in the productivity models that we um, drive these days, humans become mechanized in the process.
Mhm.
Alternatively, cultivation is a both and model, and cultivation values the solo practitioner and the collective. Cultivation values quick spurts of growth, but also slow. And cultivation understands that, yes, we should measure what we can see, but we also need to respect that there's a lot still percolating and marinating during dormant, invisible phases. So that both and model is something that actually is much more useful and actually can be leveraged in a time of ubiquitous technology, unprecedented burnout, and new rules for remote work.
Well, yeah, I thought that was it's just a brilliant insight, this idea of cultivation. And exactly what you just said, that there's stuff happening in the invisible. And I think there's, for all workers, especially white collar workers, where I was just listening to an acquired podcast about Mars Inc., and it was exactly what you said. Um, uh, Forrest Mars, who is the CEO, his revolution was to keep the factories running all night, 24 hours a day, as opposed to 12 hours a day, and hire more workers. And that's the point, right? That's how we started to think about productivity. How many bars, how many Mars bars, Milky Way, Snickers, off the line. But I think again that seems like just a completely missed model, especially when you think about work that needs to be creative. That there is this alternative, which is cultivation. So obviously, to cultivate, you have this tool or this framework: move, think, rest, which leads to cultivation and productivity too, however you want to define it. But again, I like this new lens of cultivation. So can we talk through all three and
Yeah.
how they interact with each other?
Yeah. So, and just to build a little bit more on what you were just sharing about the Mars example and shifting away from productivity to cultivation, we're really shifting away from only valuing activity and output to really relishing impact. And I think that's where we really want to land, and the motor framework helps us
Yes.
to do that. So the motor framework is not a siloed framework. It's not first you move, then you think, then you rest. That's not the concept here. It's very integrative and it's very situational. But to just unpack what each of those dimensions can
Yes.
look like, movement, obviously it's important that we exercise, but that's not really the full focus here. What I'm talking about is something we could think of as movement hygiene. How are we integrating movement into the ways that we are working within a morning, within a full day, within an entire year? And the reason that matters is that as humans, we are designed to move. The spinal cord is an extension of the brain. And if we sit at our desk, at our laptop for prolonged hours, we are constricting blood flow to the brain, which actually means we're constricting oxygen to the brain, which means we're really not doing our best thing. To your point, Eve, especially in a knowledge economy, if you're a knowledge worker. So movement hygiene can look like everything from incorporating a standing desk to making sure that you are standing, stretching, that you are
Good
being
now. Yes, yes.
like right now, for me, you and I are both lifelong dancers. I love a good dance break, but also walks. And in my research, I interviewed up to 60 people for this book for the primary qualitative research. I also hired a research assistant, did a lot of the secondary research to unpack the neuroscience behind this. But a lot of people are not moving more because they have in their mind this triggering word of exercise versus movement, and this
Mhm.
expectation that it should be Peloton, that it should be Pilates, that it has to be an hour carved out of their day. But really, I have, for example, I have the privilege to be able to work from home, and I have a walk that I know will take 3 minutes. I have a walk that I know will take 7 minutes, and it's really about the budget of time and what I can afford. Sometimes just walking up and down the stairs and unloading the dishwasher. So that's the movement hygiene. Just as we are thinking about hygiene of washing our hands and making sure that's a part of our practice, we need to be incorporating movement hygiene as an individual, as teams, and as organizations. The thought part is to not only focus on rational, crisp cognition, which is important at work, but to do some focus as well on backcasting and forecasting. So backcasting is the role of reflection, the role of memory. Forecasting is all about imagination, dreaming, daydreaming. And if you think about those dimensions that I've just parsed out, they require us to slow down. They require us to pause. And they also activate the default mode network in the brain, which is the type of neurosynapses that come to life when we tap out of the world, when we zoom out, so that we have a little bit, we're unburdening the cognitive load in the neofrontal cortex, and different regions of the brain can get to work. It's what I call the sexy, juicy bits of productivity can come to work, so that when we return to the work at hand, we experience those light bulb moments, things seem to click in place, and clearer thinking happenings. The rest piece, I'd like you to think about it in terms of intermittent resting. So making sure that you are breaking up your day with pauses, with breaks. I do 90-second daydream breaks. I learned a lot from the research of John Medina, who has a series of books called Brain Rules, and he's a neuroscience researcher and professor out in Seattle, Washington. But he really, his research shows that we actually should not have working sessions that are longer than 30 to 40 minutes. And then we should be getting up, we should be in engaging conversation. He also says that the ideal workplace should have the equivalent of a gymnasium at its core. So so one more thing, when we talk about rest, I was also interested in scaling intermittent resting. And so I interviewed people who had taken sabbatical, and not just academics. A lot of tech companies have 5-year sabbatical. Every 5 years, you can qualify for a sabbatical. People in nonprofits who I interviewed who've taken sabbatical. So think about the motor framework, the Move, Think, Rest framework in terms of movement hygiene, backcasting and forecasting, and intermittent resting.
It's simple yet revolutionary. That's sort of how I looked at it, because I agree with you. Each one of those together, there are some triggering things and I wanted to talk about those triggering things. If it was so easy to move fast, then wouldn't we be doing it already? So my question
Exactly.
is, what are the hurdles?
So some of the hurdles are cultural, right? So culture is essentially how we do things around here. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And not paying attention to the realities of the startling statistics about burnout. So 2023 research shows that upwards of 70% of employees have self-reported moments of burnout. We all have been aware of the quiet quitting that's been going on. There's a lot of productivity theater, which is actually a term that's used in the productivity literature. So it's the barriers are that it's not modeled for us to take breaks. It's not modeled for us to incorporate rest, to incorporate different modalities of thinking in addition to just clear action decision making. Even when you think about the ways that most of us have been educated, those of us who've gotten to apparent success, we did things in a way where we fill in the blank, we answer the question correctly, we fill in the dot, we're solutions based versus process based. And the cultivation motor framework is asking us to fall in love with process instead of just the solution. So culture is a big one. So we have to unlearn certain behaviors, and then we have to unlearn it en masse and think and reconsider organizational policy in our human organizations so that they actually become more human. In a big part of the book, I spend some time offering up new sorts of KPIs, key performance indicators, that we can offer in our human organizations. Organizations are organisms because they're made up of humans, so that we reconsider how we hire and recruit, how we incentivize. What if, for example, one of our KPIs included innovation sprints, and we tracked and measured the type of ideas that come out of innovation sprints before and after? What if we actually really paid attention to the input from people who go on sabbatical? And sabbaticals, you can be really creative and experimental with all of these ideas. One of the things in my design thinking background that we really value is the role of lateral thinking. What can I learn from people who work in adjacent, near and far adjacent sectors? So with that, it could be a micro sabbatical where you incentivize members of your team to attend a conference in an area that they know nothing about. So let's say you work in health tech and you attend a conference in the fashion industry. What light bulbs go off for you? What can you then add back to the team and the organization? So changing policy, being aware of the behaviors that we take for granted, challenging our assumptions, those are some of the barriers that are really accessible. They're low-hanging fruit that we can run experiments on. One of the things I really want to emphasize is I'm not trying to add to people's to-do lists. I'm not saying we should throw the baby out the bathwater, but I am a big advocate for prototyping and being more experimental in how we design work.
Absolutely. And so I was talking to somebody about your book, and they were saying that they feel like the idea of move, think, rest, companies with this return to work, these, the return to office mandates, and also these idea of productivity trackers. So there's these things, I guess, luckily I don't have to work for a company like this, that track your keys, like your keystrokes. So again,
Yes.
you're incorporating deliberate rest, or even an innovation sprint where you want to use a notebook and you're not using your keyboard, you get penalized. So it does feel like we're moving further away from sort of these big ideas, and important ideas of moving a workplace, through the 21st century, especially because AI could do a lot of those things that you're talking about that are normally defined as productivity. So I wonder, again, what would you say to a mid-level, say, associate, or somebody who reads your book who has to manage up and talk about these issues? Because that was the question. Obviously I get it, you get it, but what about the people who are, like you said, sort of stuck in their ways, not experimental? What would you do to bring some of these concepts? Like, what is there one that's easier to bring? Is it a smaller version of the concept? How do you look at that?
So what you're identifying is that we are in a moment of a lot of fear. And so what we are seeing with the shift to micromanagement, and because what the motor framework is really, it gets driven by a macro management leadership model, right? That's fundamentally driven by trust, right? I will trust that people will get the work done. So Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, when he wrote his memoir years ago, Let My People Go Surfing, he was ahead of his time. He's ahead of his time in so many ways of understanding that if I'm attuned to what makes people tick personally, they will show up and do their best work. He understood that work will increasingly become inside out work in the future of work. But if you are someone who has to manage up, one of the first places to start is to start from curiosity, is to start by starting a conversation with your manager from a place of curiosity about what are you observing about engagement? Would you be open to a different way to work? And what if we started with, and this is a great place to start, again, starting with curiosity and asking a question, especially to manage up, with the almighty meeting. Meetings are the OG artifact of organizational culture. You can tell so much about a company, an organization, by when meetings are held, how meetings are run, who gets to lead the meeting, how long they last, the cadence, et cetera, et cetera. So proffering up an idea, a question about, would there be a possibility to think about running our meetings differently? And one way to do that is not just to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say we're going to redo a 30-minute meeting, but to say, what if we took the first 5 minutes of a 30-minute question and a meeting, and started with question storming. So question storming is a way of brainstorming that instead of collecting solutions, you're collecting questions. So you start with a prompt, which is our market research model for Q3. Maybe that's the subtopic of the meeting. Maybe it's the holiday party. But instead of asking people to come up with answers, you ask them to follow the process, and you ask people for 90 seconds quietly to themselves to jot down 5 what if questions around that topic. So quietly. Then the next 2 or 3 minutes, share with one person what are the questions that you came up with. And then in the final, maybe now I'm getting a little over 5 minutes, but 2 minutes or so, what was your favorite question that surfaced? And now what you've done is you've democratized the process. You've honored the introverts on the team. You have, as my friend and colleague Warren Berger likes to say, you have acknowledged that asking questions is a way of thinking. And now you've oxygenated the meeting space to start with this very spaciousness, blue sky place. And you can begin to gamify this, incentivize this, bring those what if questions forward to the next meeting. But I would start by, out of a place of curiosity, asking the manager about their openness to this. And I would also buttress it with the research that people like from my book that bring, right? You can now bring documented research from books like Move, Think, Rest, books like Your Brain on Art by Ivy Ross and Susan Magsamen, books that are looking at the neuroscience of how the brain actually works. And I'm just forgetting the book that's by Annie Murphy Paul. I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting the title. I love this book, but it's all about shifting away from only thinking about the brain to the mind, right? So buttressing the ask with people who've already done a lot of the hard work to offer up suggestions. But I would start with the meeting because it's an artifact of organizations. One of the people I interviewed for Move, Think, Rest is Annie Dean, who is a leader, a VP at Atlassian. Atlassian is 100% remote global organization. And one of these they have really provocatively tackled our meetings. And in her interview with me, she talked about why should meetings last 30 minutes? And why don't we challenge, do they last longer? Could they be shorter? Could they be, do we need to do it on video? Could we do it while we're walking? So that's an example of a company that has leaders that, because of the constraint of working remotely, they have really been much more experimental.
So good. Well, I thank you for just Porchlight just posted that the book is called The Extended Mind, if you're interested in it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I had another question from an educator. And I'm going to start with a little bit of the questions that I had received, again, when I was sort of talking about your book. But Porchlight, Gabby, anybody there who you, if you can receive comments, since I can't see the chat, let me know if there's more questions. So I had a question from educators. How can educators use this?
Oh
Besides,
gosh. Yeah. Well, so as a former
yeah,
educator, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
with
I
these school environments that may also be antiquated in some of
yeah.
these things that we talked about. Yes.
Well, so I was a middle school English teacher in my 20s, which arguably was the best preparation for everything I've gone on to
Oh
do.
my gosh.
Yeah, it taught me to be really curious, to have a sense of humor about myself, to love learning. I was also a professor for 16 years, and I think that um, it's one of the things that, to the extent that they can, is something that I learned to do and shift, and that took me over 15 years to do, because I certainly didn't really teach this way at the middle school level. Although in middle school you can have more agency to be engaged and active, just because of who you're interacting with, tweens.
Yeah.
But at the professorial level, I shifted away from kind of a seminar style stage on stage model to, when I was leading the strategic design MBA program, to a studio model of education. So whenever possible, to kind of do a experiment with who challenging who is the expert in the room. And what a studio model of education does is, in a, let's say it's a 50-minute long session, or if it's a 3-hour long session, which is even more ideal, uh, flip the model where that 70% of the time it's the students that are interacting with each other and with the content, and only 30% of the time is the subject matter expert up in the room. And if it can be a space that's designed where students can stand up, they can be at a whiteboard, they can doodle, they can be in conversation with each other. One of the things that I started experiencing was that my classrooms were louder, there was more laughter, there was more that I was learning from my students in addition to them learning from me. They were more interactive with each other. And so that is really getting on a very meta level, movement, different types of thought, and the ability to zoom out and rest from the content and then revisit it. A lot of the same principles that John Medina has talked about in brain rules. And I know that that's not an option in a lot of environments that are educational environments that are highly regulated. But wherever possible, that where educators have an opportunity to help students fall in love with the process, to really acknowledge the high levels of gray and uncertainty and work, and that the juicy bits, the joy of learning actually comes from the problem solving, not just the test taking and the getting to the answer. And that leads me to also share that a big part of the book that I dove into was the value of liminal space, the
Yes.
liminal space that we can really dive into when we are moving, thinking in backcasting and forecasting ways, and resting. The gray is where all the discovery is at.
So I want to talk about liminal space. So I laugh because when I was researching my book around creativity, which is how we met from lots of different ways. I was always so shocked by how much thinking, this creative thinking happens. Um, but they happen in the shower, right? Why do all of our best ideas happen in the shower? So, so let's talk a little bit about liminal space. Um, you devote time to it, and I think it's a pretty, again, it's sort of a revolutionary idea when you apply it practically. So, can we talk a little bit about liminal space?
Yeah, so let's be honest, most of us don't like ambiguity, present
No.
company excluded. I love ambiguity. I love the gray. I mean, even my brand colors for my company are deep pink, deep orange, and charcoal gray. Just think gray is just one of these colors that is immersive and incredibly adaptive and forgiving. Happen to be sitting in front of a gray curtain today, which is funny. But liminals, but there is definitely the anxiety produced, trauma induced ambiguity, right? There's forest fires, and you don't have a home and a place to sleep in that evening. There's that sort of ambiguity, but there's also ambiguity that can be discovery building. And so I think when a lot of us, if we reflect on incredible transition moments in our lives, it was when we were at the precipice where we did not know what was coming next, when we did not know what to do next, that we were required to call upon our past experiences, our past skills. We were required to ask for help. We were required to admit that we did not know. And we were prompted to dream and imagine about what could be, what was possible. And all of those inputs combined lead us to be able to leap and to take the next step and then the next and the next. And so liminal space in the motor framework is really available to us when we step away from the desk and we go for a walk and we do some forest bathing, when we engage in a work of fiction that helps us to dream and imagine, because when we read fiction, we are inhabiting a different geography, gender, time period. All of those exercises, those moments, and those activities get us into that transitory space where the default mode network takes over, where different neurosynapses are at work, which is essential for the real clear cognition and the neocortex to happen. It actually will not happen if I go back to my original model of wonder and rigor, if there's too much rigor. If there's too much rigor, where we get myopically focused in the weeds, we will burn out. On the other hand, if we stay too long in the liminal space, if there's too much wonder, we won't get any traction, right? So it's really important to toggle back and forth and design space and time for the liminal space. One of the other people I interviewed were some leaders at a really cool architectural design firm called A+I. And they did this really cool project for a division of Publicis, a company called a division within, it's a creativity catalyst within Publicis called Le Truc. And when you go into the Le Truc offices in New York City, I've never really been in an office space like this. It was literally biodiverse, bio in terms of how the spaces that humans need to think and work in. So you can kind of choose your own work adventure. There can be a kind of a little cozy hovel. There can be a deep cave space, southern facing light windows, light streaming through. So liminal space is an opportunity to activate the default mode network, to fall in love with process so that we can get more distilled thinking later. It's really essential.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is a lot of people are taking their liminal space, and now because it's so easy to listen to a podcast or to take those Zoom calls, sometimes maybe where you think you're doing the move piece of the MTR sort of framework, maybe the problem is that you're now taking away your liminal space. That's
Absolutely.
asking that move piece. So I think
Yeah.
what you're talking about is that, like a walking meeting, that wouldn't be enough if it's not within your framework. So that's why I think it's so important to read your book, because it's really not move or think or rest or even a prescription, like you said, in that order. It's this dance between all three and trying to understand really what's behind what you're doing. You're not trying to, like you said, sort of throw in the 30-minute Peloton because it's good for your heart health. It's like you said, it's hygiene. And so that's what I love about your book. And I think it's a really important for all leaders and really all educators and all workers and everybody. Let's just say, I think it's a really, really revolutionary and important framework. So
thank you. And it allows us to take agency over our work. And Eve, you and I love the space-time continuum.
That's right.
And that's a say it again.
I said we both like agency. We try to really help people have some agency in their own life, which is
That's right.
harder these days.
It's harder, and it's not impossible.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
But here's the thing that I think we're forgetting. We are actually in the middle of a human revolution. We are not in the middle of a tech revolution. The technology, because we can get answers so much more quickly, and we actually can arrive at spaciousness more quickly. We have to contend with our busyness addiction, and I think that's part of what's happening. That's the friction that's happening, because we can get the answers more quickly. Like, now what? Well, now you have time to think critically. Now you have time to imagine. Now you have time for an eyeball to eyeball collaboration. Now you have time to go for a walk, to get a little bit more rest, because all of that is going to make your work more stellar, your thinking more clearer. And I just wanted to share another thing that I learned in this research related to liminal space. There's something called the hypnagogic state and the hypnopompic state. The hypnagogic state is happening right as we're drifting into a sleep or to a nap. The hypnopompic state is happening as we are emerging from rest. So what researchers have found is that when you seed a question, or you think about a problem that you've been noodling on, as you're entering the hypnagogic state, and Thomas Edison used to do this. He used to hold two heavy balls in each hand, and he was drifting to sleep. He knew that the balls would drop, and he would wake up. And the first time he did this, he found this accidentally. He didn't have balls in his hand, but he started doing this on purpose, because he realized that things were clicking into place. And that was because of the different neurosynapses that were able to go to work when he was in that in betwixt liminal space called the hypnagogic, that you're groggy going into sleep. So planting those questions, and then if you can take a 15-minute nap, you'd be amazed at what becomes clear. And additionally, the hypnopompic state, how many of us, as we are emerging, awakening in the morning, something will pop into our head that was stymieing us the day before. Begin to just have this experiment, this practice of just seeding the question, letting it go, and letting your mind do the work, right? Of letting those different neurosynapses get to work, so that the answers will emerge. The synchronicity that needs to take place will happen.
Oh, I love that so much. And I think Angela said something so beautiful. She said, yes, human revolution. So she's echoing what you said. We need to consciously create the world we want. The more tech and AI we have, the more human skills we need to retain and grow. And to me,
Absolutely.
there's nothing more human than moving and resting. And again, and even thinking the way you're talking about thinking, right? It's a very different, like we said, this idea of liminal space. And like you said, when we get our best ideas, those are all things AI can't replicate. And
No.
it's fundamentally human. And I think that sometimes we forget that. So thank you, Angela, for that reminder. We're definitely, and what's also beautiful about even Angela's words, retain and grow. Retain and grow is cultivation. It's not productivity,
Yes.
right? You have to retain your
Yes.
soil, make it better, grow things on it. It's back to your cultivation.
Yes.
And so I know that we're coming to the end of our talk, but I really did want to ask just two more things. There's a lot of books out here. I think you and Chris Hayes, it would be fun for you to do an event together, because he just released a book on the attention crisis.
I would love that.
And so I think I actually read them. Where's that book? It's somewhere around here, but I read it sort of stacked with yours in a way. And I was like, oh, these books actually really complement each other well. And so can we talk a little bit about, there's obviously the workforces we just talked about, whether it's the not the lack of trust, the key stacking, the return to office, the key tracking, the non-publicist organization that doesn't have different types of biodiverse space. They just posted his book too. And so besides just our workplaces that don't promote sort of maybe the old ones that focus on productivity don't promote a move, think, rest framework. What I've noticed about Chris's book is like, this doesn't promote a move, think, rest framework either, because it's really addictive. And it talks about how hyper addictive it is, how much more addictive it's becoming, what companies are doing to literally grab our attention. And in a way, it means that we're in this attention crisis because we're moving through so many different things. It's really hard to retain anything. And so, do you think Move, Think, Rest would be an important framework to sort of combat that attention crisis?
I do. I think it's the antidote to the busyness addiction. I think it's the antidote to what Chris Hayes has outlined as the attention crisis. Because really, when you engage in the motor framework, you are shifting away from distraction to noticing. So, for example, what if instead of taking a walk, listening to a podcast, or even listening to your favorite playlist on Spotify or Apple Music, no headphones, none of these guys in your ears, but you just do kind of a noticing walk, and it could be smells. It could be it could just be the layers of sound. If you live in a really busy environment, a siren, okay, some birds. Now, oh, car brakes. Oh, my own heart. The sound of feet crunching through leaves or just on the pavement, right? But what we have these kind of artificial cocoons that we have around us because of this technology. And so we have to decide, we have to be much more intentional about once we understand the beauty that neuroscience research shows us of allowing not just the brain to function, but the mind, human consciousness, curiosity, the imagination, intuition to come alive. That only happens when we dive into the motor framework, when we design space and time to move, think, and rest in the ways that I'm advocating for, in the ways that I'm sure Chris Hayes is outlining in his book. And I give you some help. So each chapter
Yeah,
ends with reflection questions and exercises, not just for you as an individual, but for your team, for
yeah.
your entire organization, so that you can do baby steps to begin to integrate this balance, because the technology, really, I think the way we should be thinking about the technology is a lever. It's a thing to leverage human
Right.
consciousness, imagination, curiosity, and intuition.
Well, that's what I love. I'm not scrolling my phone as we're talking, ironically. I'm just actually looking, 'cause I have your book and my notes that I took
Thank you.
digitally. And so I actually think that is one of my favorite things to do. Is again, you can't see it here, but if I had the actual hard copy, you would see one of the best things about your books and all of what you do is you're so practical, Natalie, and that's a huge win for anybody who wants, again, doesn't have a lot of time, needs to pick what book um, to read. This one's a very, very important one because you're so practical. So you actually get some work done while you read. So I just was looking at one of my notes that you give a lot of great suggestions for you. So what I love about it is you have team exercises, which is so great. You have you exercises again. So if you feel like you can't have agency because maybe you're in a difficult workplace or a difficult education environment, or even you feel like you're addicted to your phone, like you're not going to be able to combat that. You can, instead of thinking of taking away, I can't use my phone all day. What I love about your book is it's more about adding.
Yeah.
And adding to me is a much less punitive way to look at the world than taking away. So I just wanted to um, look at some of these that I really, really liked. And maybe you can pick one, but I mean, the one I circled was the time awareness journal. And so
Hmm.
I just wanted to tell you I did that. I didn't keep a full journal because that scared me. It felt too like I was committing. But what I did was I used my Evernote, which is my notes app that I prefer. And what it said, so I'll just read you what the suggestion was and then how I used it.
Awesome.
For 1 week, track when you feel most energized and creative versus when you feel drained. Notice the natural rhythm of your work patterns without trying to change them. Pay attention to when you naturally enter flow states and what conditions enable them. It was very, very, very revolutionary to know that literally the times I felt most productive and engaged were always after an endurance thing I did for myself with movement. And those days that I did that were highly more productive, and I felt happier than the days I didn't. And let's just say I have the privilege that I've been training for this endurance hike that I just did. It is a memory, it mimics Everest. And I was telling Natalie before we started this that it's something I've never done before. A lot of my teenagers friends call me a NARP, which is a non-athletic regular person. So for NARPs, I think maybe former athletes actually even have. And so I wanted to say one thing. So for a NARP, I actually think maybe the move part is almost easier because
Yeah.
when you discover it, it's so revolutionary. And that's why I did
Yeah.
my time journal, my time notes. But I almost feel like it's interesting because I was talking to a former athlete about this. And there's a lot of triggers because they don't move the same as they used to. So this gets into what we work about our other books around this idea that perfection is not completion, that our dancing may not look the same as it did 10 years ago, and that's okay. But it was interesting to hear former athletes saying movement was triggering for the other reason.
Right.
It may not look as perfect as it used to. So so I just want to say, for if you're former athletes out there, does not have to be the same type of movement. Track that
No.
journal and see when you feel most energized. But it's for me, it's
Yeah.
always after movement, which was fascinating.
Oh, thank you so much for engaging in that exercise. And I love that that was you now have proof of concept. You have noticed and you have this awareness. And as you said, that is something that you can do for yourself so that you show up more fully, more joyfully, more alert. I am new to open water swimming. I've swam laps for a long time, but I didn't grow up as a competitive swimmer. My friends who swam competitively in high school, they can't go back to. I've invited them to these open water swim vacations, and
Yes,
it's
yes.
triggering. It's like you said, because there's this comparison. Even you and I did that really wonderfully fun moment. We did that salsa dance lesson for around your work, and it's joyful. How can you take yourself too seriously, and when you get evidence of how it sparks greater creativity in other areas of your work and life, that's where the habit formation comes into play, because habits need a feedback loop, and the way that the loop continues to feedback is through some sort of a reward, right? And for me, the reward is swimming has this way of simultaneously calming me down and energizing me. So, like, how could I not? But to be honest, the other reward I give myself is I have really nice lotions and perfumes that
Oh,
I
love it.
adore my body after I shower. So like that, that's the treat, right? But the thing about what I wanted to equip people with. So thank you for highlighting what's at the end of each chapter. People will also see a 66-day motor challenge, which we are going to begin in October. It will take us through
Oh,
10 weeks
yay.
of the year. And it's these real accessible 5 to 10 minute long activities that you can do every single day so that you can build a habit, because the research shows it actually takes 66 times before something becomes a habit. I thought it was 30 days, but apparently it's 66. So that's what I invite all of you to engage. And Angela, thank you so much for being here and for your engagement. And I just want to read her. She said also, Eve, yes, we are not connected to the world around us. She went forest bathing on vacation and
Ooh,
realized how much we miss on daily basis. Oh, and the Japanese, as a public policy, they were seeing that they were tracking that workers in health statistics had unprecedented increasing amounts of heart disease and stress. And so they collaborated with physicians, and they began to do this, making sure that they incentivize office workers to go out into parks if they could, into woods. And they had I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the Japanese terminology, but in English it's forest bathing. And that's a relatively new term. I think that was only in the 1980s that started.
yeah, I'd never heard of it before you told me about it. So we're at the end of the hour. Let's all take a minute. I'm just going to check the QR code and make sure that it works if you want to buy the book. Um,
Yes, thank you.
so we can all just head to that QR code. It's actually right above us in the YouTube
Thank
link.
you, Porchlight Books. That's awesome.
Thank you, Porchlight. This was amazing. We could keep on going, but at least we got a little bit of a taste of all the amazing exercises and experiments you could do in Natalie's book. I'm sure we'll be together again, Natalie. I'd love to bring you out to LA for in-person event. So this is a perennial issue. It's not going away. So I can imagine you being on the road for a long time with these messages.
Thank you so much, Eve. You are a gem, and I appreciate your excitement, enthusiasm, and friendship. And thank you, everyone who took time out of your day to learn about a model that will. My goal is to help you flourish. So thank you, everybody.
Move, think, and rest today. Bye, everyone.
Bye.